A very interesting ruling that came yesterday from the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and it is all to do with the trans round. And this is not something that I cover very often on this programme, but I thought this juncture was a moment we should discuss this. Because the judgment says, the ruling says, that trans women can legally be excluded from women's lavatories, changing rooms and other single-sex spaces. And I suppose, you know, if there's a hostel, for argument's sake, that has in it women that have been abused and raped, they might take very serious objection to somebody who is trans finishing up in a hostel like that. We talk a lot about minority rights, and there's little doubt there have been huge step forwards in minority rights, in equality and in fairness. But there is also the rights of the majority. And there are some that think this is a great ruling. The Daily Mail, huge screaming front page, huge boost for women's rights. That's how the Daily Mail feel about it. As I say, the majority have rights too. That's at least my feeling. But these are difficult, murky waters. Well, joining me, who better than Peter Tatchell, LGBT and human rights campaigner and director, of course, of the Peter Tatchell Foundation. Peter, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
Were you surprised by this ruling, or has there been sort of in the wind some changes, on this whole debate coming?
Well, first of all, the Equality and Human Rights Commission's guidance is just that, it's guidance.
Yeah.
It has no force in law whatsoever. It is merely a recommendation. What it seems to be saying is that there are certain legitimate circumstances where it would be proportionate to allow single-sex spaces to exclude trans women. That is the main thrust of what it's saying. But that, of course, goes against the core principles of the Equality Act, which is the actual law of the land, which is all about including trans people. Now, if we look at this issue in a dispassionate way, we can see that there are legitimate concerns about women's safety, and I support them. But it would be very wrong to generalize about all trans women. And the underlying narrative or presumption of much of this guidance is that trans women are a potential threat to biological women. And that is simply factually untrue. Most trans women are no threat to anyone, least of all biological women.
I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that's true, Peter, but there have been one or two grievous cases, haven't there? There have been cases in prison of trans women in women's prisons committing sexual assaults and rapes. I mean, these things have happened.
Well, you're right. It is a very tiny minority of cases. But of course, in a democracy, we don't make law based on exceptional circumstances or breaches of trust and law. We base the law on the generality. So, for example, I hope no one would say that Muslim people should be restricted in any way just because a tiny minority happen to be terrorists. They are unrepresentative of the Muslim community, and anybody who proposed to generalize against the whole Muslim community would rightly be shouted down. And I think it's the same with trans people. I have trans friends, and I've had some who I've known for over 50 years. They are absolutely no threat to anyone. They are totally accepted by biological women. I also have a friend who works in a women's centre in the north of England, and with the agreement of both the staff and the women users, they have accepted trans women for the last 6 years. There's never been a problem, never been any incident or complaint whatsoever. So I think we have to keep things in proportion.
Well, I'll tell you where there is a big problem, Peter, and where I think we really do have to draw a distinction between biological sex and chosen gender, and that is in the field of women's sport. I mean, clearly the case of the American trans swimmer, Leah Thomas, has led to so many women in sport saying, where is the incentive for a 14-year-old girl to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go and train if she's up against somebody who went through puberty as a male, is 6'3", has a completely different body to that of a woman? I mean, there surely there we have to draw some level of distinction between biological sex and chosen gender. Otherwise, it really is very, very bad news for women's rights.
Well, I totally agree. There has to be fairness in sport, and that it is not right for women to be disadvantaged by other competitors for any particular reason. And again, we are talking about a tiny minority of trans athletes.
But that doesn't matter, does it? But that doesn't matter, does it? You know, if you set your life's goal on winning an Olympic medal and you come fourth because one of the people in the top three, you know, as I say, is 7 or 8 inches taller than you, has a completely different physical shape, you're going to be pretty upset.
Well, I can understand that. Again, I'll reference my own personal example. I have a biological female friend who is 6'4". Now, should she be excluded from sport because she has this huge height advantage? She was out of her biology.
I'm sorry, there are some very tall women, but they do not have the same bone structures and physical shape as men who have been through puberty and then have decided to change later in life. What are we going to do? I mean, are we going to bring in some rules in sport that make it fair for women, or are we going to turn a blind eye, Peter, and say it's only the odd exceptional case?
No, we mustn't look the other way. We must be fair. And I would favour individual assessment. So look at each individual trans athlete. You know, do they have a demonstrable proven advantage? It's not always the case that they do. I have a friend who plays for a women's football team. She, among the team players, among the women, she is one of the smallest. She's got a very small physique. She's towered over by some of the biological women.
Wow.
There's no way that her participation in that football team gives her an unfair advantage.
All right. And a final thought, Peter Tatchell, if I may, on the extraordinary events of last Friday, where the government managed to U-turn twice in the space of 3 hours. What are your thoughts on those events last Friday?
Well, the government promised us a ban on conversion therapy, full stop, way back in 2018, almost 4 years ago. It was reiterated in the Queen's speech last year, and indeed was confirmed last Wednesday in the House of Commons. It is a complete shambles. The government doesn't know its arse from its elbow. Really, it is symptomatic of the chaos and incompetence in 10 Downing Street.
I think on that point, we are in absolute, complete and total agreement. Peter Tatchell, thank you for joining me this evening.